And we're live. Welcome to Music Matters 2020. I'm your host, Jason Tramm, and I'm delighted that this is the first time we've had a guest in the studio live. We have David Winkler, a wonderful composer, joining us today, and delighted to have you here. Welcome, David.
Jason, thank you so much, not only for inviting me, but for doing this entire series. I mean, Music Matters is fantastic. It's something that we desperately need, and you're fulfilling this incredible, need for the entire music community. We all know what has happened and how many dead ends we're currently facing. So I want to thank you again for making this enormous effort on our behalf.
Well, we started this podcast with the to give musicians a chance to discuss what's going on in the music world in the time of this COVID era, and to find innovative people who are doing innovative things, finding solutions, finding new avenues to way forward, because the realities of what we're dealing with now are so different than what we faced in the past. But this is a chance for us to do something new, to be cutting edge. And like that video I just watched, the Corona, very powerful. I just watched that for the first time now, and literally hearing that mezzo, Natasha, an artist I know well, and to watch, to feel the power of that music, and to see those images really just stopped me in my tracks. And I'm really I'm drained. That's very emotional, and it's always a pleasure to bring friends on to talk about music and to talk about these issues. So
I know we're going to be talking about other things, but concerning Corona, my love, I'm really happy about your response, because that's exactly what I wanted to accomplish. I want to get the listeners' attention, both obviously musically in the audio sense, but also visually to a degree down the road. This first section is an introduction to a different way of being able to compose opera. So the listeners may have noticed that this was what we call vocalese, not exactly words per se, but the essence of words. And for me, this first part of Corona sort of went beyond words. The idea was, what can you possibly say? So I thought that I would use, the intrinsic deep sound of Natasha's voice to be able to convey kind of the essence. Well, we're constantly aiming for the symbolism in what we do. So I thought I would just start with the symbolism. And then later on, as this operatic project grows with other characters, it will also include like popular type lyrics and things that could sort of pass for, let's call it, radio play. I mean, that work is about 2 minutes and 40 seconds long, which I guess could fit on a radio program somewhere. And some of the other sections will also be similar to that. They're going to tell stories about what we've all gone through, what we're going through now. But from an operatic standpoint, because, the difference in opera for me is you're dealing with the extremes of emotion. You're dealing with the very, very positive, hopeful emotions, and you're dealing with a very, very, chasm-like, death related, the darkness. So it's life and death and everything in between. That's what opera's about. And so that's sort of like what this particular journey has become.
And it elevates the human spirit to the most dramatic forms, and I think the subject matter lends itself very well to opera. And it really just, I'm still like, I'm verklempt.
Let me take over for you for a few minutes. You just relax there.
You're on.
But I mean, there is something to what you just said, which is really pivotal, I think, about what makes music not only let's call it descriptive or dramatic music that has a subtext or something like that, but also all instrumental music, choral music, etc. The sound of the human voice, the sound of human beings performing instruments at a high level. This really rises above our day-to-day issues and struggles, and provides a kind of a soul-like nourishment that we all really need. And what we're seeing in audiences and musicians around the country and around the world who want to connect, they want to be able to share. They know this shared experience is special, specific to what human beings do. It's one of the best things we do, creating art that has a chance to live out over the decades into the future. Somehow create a message that's going to resonate beyond our current devastating troubles.
Now, being a New York City resident, you lived through some of the worst of the Corona outbreak and virus. So did that factor into your decision to write this piece and to put this together?
So interesting. I continue to communicate not only with yourself but colleagues all around the world, And after about 3 months, and I took the directions very, very seriously, and I stayed, indoors. I made 12 trips outside my apartment.
Wow.
For over 3 months. I was very, very careful about it, and I'm still careful about it. But the point is that at a certain point, it was, I think, like 2 or 3 weeks ago, a month ago, I was writing to some colleagues in I forget what country it was. I'm saying, guys, you know what it is? I feel kind of dead. I feel dead. I'm not doing what I was put on earth to do. I got to find my way out of this. So that may have been, maybe an extreme description for some folks. I mean, I'm actually much more optimistic than that. But the inability to actually ply our trade, we've all been working at this since we were kids. And, and some of us are reaching a point of, how should we say, fluency. I mean, how much conducting, how many choirs, how many works do you do? I mean, this is something you have been doing for so many years, and so many of our colleagues, and the not being able to do that feels like something has been stolen from us. Yeah. Even though we have to be put in perspective, we have to understand, that thousands upon thousands of people have lost their lives innocently. Our brothers and sisters here in the United States of America and other countries worldwide, we know that, and we know more is going to happen. Nonetheless, I think that as artists, we have to keep focused and to realize that we do supply something of pivotal importance to our fellow human beings. We know this. I mean, in the Western, the standard musical repertoire is over 1,000 years old, and it's not an accident that we have all this music. I mean, it either is pivotally important during its own time or another time. All of this repertoire, which continues to be, relevant at certain points, or it's certainly, the kind of things we all study as kids. I was listening to, and I know it's your show, but I was listening to Perotinus Sederunt Principis and Viderunt Omnes, pieces from the 1290s, okay? And though it's done in sort of a modern way.
Leonon and Perotinus?
You're right. Leonon came first, Perotinus came last.
Yeah, that's right.
And, I mean, it was just inspiring, that they found a way to expand the horizons of what they were trying to do, and because they did, that music has lasted like 1,000 years, and we all can draw on it.
Well, it's so let's go back in time before COVID. Let's talk about your career and your artistic journey. So I'm just going to go through a couple of your biography for our audience who may not know you directly. You've been a recipient of a Leonard Bernstein Composer Fellowship, a Fromm Foundation, a Tanglewood Commission, commissions from the Korean Broadcasting System, the National Symphony Orchestra, Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts. The list goes on and on and on. You've been a composer and resident of the Aspen Music Festival, the Banff Center, Chautauqua Opera, and Lincoln Center Foundation for the Arts. So all of these prestigious organizations. I know you write in all of the traditional classical genres of symphony, concerto, opera, ballet, and in fact, I've worked on a few of your pieces in a variety of genres. Right. So describe your growth, your journey as an artist, and how you came to be where you are today.
As a composer, and if there are any other composers out there, you may already know this, but I've been thinking about this a lot. And I have come to the conclusion that the single most important thing you can do as a composer is to learn who you are and to reach a point where you can be reasonably spontaneous with your musical thoughts, and that hopefully the left brain and the right brain have decided to work together. And once that happens, you have a chance, to really be fluent. And fluency is what all the great masters achieved. They all achieved their potential, I think, and they were all fluent, in some cases from a very, very young age, which is not my case. It took me many, many years to, I think of myself really as a work in progress. I would not say that I'm fluent. I would say that there is some potential, and I continue to work at it.
Well, it's the artistic expression that you come across is very powerful, and that you have been writing so many different. You write very quickly. I mean, having premiered a piece that you wrote, I was amazed by how fast you're able to write the piece and how you revise it, and the process that goes into this. So, describe your process when you write a piece like a symphony or a concerto, such a massive structure, long form composition,
or the ballet that you premiered of mine, the Alice in Wonderland. We did. here in New Jersey at the Axelrod. Well, that was partly the result of necessity. That was really desperation, which sometimes plays a wonderful role in the creative process, because sometimes the less you think, the better job you do. And you have to fall back on your music instincts, which hopefully have evolved to the point where you don't have to think about them. And what you do is you allow yourself to, step into the work in a purely sort of a musical way. And the best part of it is that you reach the three-quarter point of the creation of a composition, and then it starts talking back to you. When your piece starts talking back to you, composers out there, then you have a shot at it. Then that means that you can have a dialogue with your work before it's been completed, in which case you can probably arrive at maybe the best possible result. But the other thing I was going to say, though, concerning the advice to young composers to try to learn who they are. I think it's true of any fine artist, anybody. But in the arts in particular, because you're working in mediums which are usually a step or two removed from who you are, you want to be able to be totally fluent in that medium. The other thing I wanted to mention was that I was thinking about, over the many years of composing music, that the other rule of thumb is to finish whatever you start. Do not leave incomplete pieces lying around, because they don't count. You don't get anything from an idea or from 20 ideas. You only get something from a completed work. You have to live through the beginning and the middle and the end. And also, I just want to add a little bit of sort of shop talk here, which I've never discussed publicly. But sometimes, you don't have to begin at the beginning. If you're uncomfortable at the beginning, you can begin at the end and work your way toward the beginning. There are plenty of pieces by Copland, etc., like that. I'm certain. I think the Beethoven Triple was written 3-2-1. That's just my feeling about it. But the composers must be fluent in that sense. And if it turns out that your best idea is really for the finale, go with it. Start that, do that, finish that, and then work your way back from 2 or third movement, fourth movement, whatever, to the very beginning. And that way you're really, really, really in control. But the thing is, you have to remain yourself throughout the entire process. That's the reason to compose fast, not because you're afraid. You want to compose quickly so that it continues to be you every step of the way. If you got a piece lying around, say for a couple of years, particularly like a major work, an opera or a ballet, if it's sitting there and it's not complete, 2 years, 3 years down the line, you're a different person. So it's an additional challenge to completing the creative process. It's better just to drive your way through as quickly as you possibly can, arrive at the whole, and let it talk back to you. Then you got to.
As a conductor, to work with living composers is some of my favorite artistic journeys, because I can't ask Beethoven any questions about why did you write that? Why are the jumps and the octaves so? But you and I can sit down and say, when we did the ballet, there were so many. We worked with Gabriel Chachnik, who's a gifted choreographer and just a great mind, and he had such specific. We needed a children's chorus, and we needed his artistic vision and your artistic vision, and me making it come alive was such a vital part of the process. And it shifted as we did it, because these things tend to. Live theater always is changing, and it's just amazing. To think that Beethoven was doing the same thing in his lifetime, and the Mozart had the same. It's great to see the process come alive, and I think a lot of people don't realize that classical music is not a museum piece. It was just the same. It was very similar back then. They had the specific deadlines, and they had to write really fast because things change. And I think
another good example, I think of Stravinsky and Diaghilev, or other people that he may have collaborated with early part of the 20th century. I feel the choreographer looking over her shoulder and saying, no, we need
15 seconds shorter.
We need 8 bars more. Please, just do it. And it's sort of like that. And that accounts for some of the, how should we say, the idiosyncratic phrasing in certain of these pieces. I'm certain he was in that room. And we take
them as gospel now, like those have to,
yes.
But they were,
brilliant idea. But, it came about because of necessity.
Sam Raimi told me this story, that he was in a staging of Don Giovanni, and it was with Franco. It was Zeffirelli. It's a Zeffirelli production in New York City, and he was the star. He was Don Giovanni, and they went through the whole process. And 2 days before the show, they never staged the graveyard scene. So they got together and they had an emergency staging rehearsal, and he didn't do it again. They just finished the rehearsal and never got staged. So they just looked at each other. There was a Ferruccio Forlanetto, and they just said, "We'll just do what we did in Vienna." And they got a great review.
Maybe the reviewer was in Vienna.
Yeah, maybe. It's just interesting. Live theater is always fascinating to me, and the interaction between colleagues is what makes it interesting, ultimately.
But you mentioned to me at the beginning of these, set of observations, how did, things develop for me as, a younger composer getting to this point. And I've had a lot of different influences over the years. I think that, I attended graduate school for really too many years, but it was thought-provoking. And in terms of, it turns out that, music theory, the distillation of what has already been done, music theory turns out to be, if it's taught well, and if it's done with imagination, it can really have a long-term effect and a resonance for you. So the programs I went to were very, very strong on particularly contemporary music theory. Now, I don't want to spend a lot of time discussing about the, let's say the aspects of 20th century music. It's a crazy quilt of many things, but I will say one thing, which I think is fair, and hopefully I'm not going to offend too many people. Well, the thing is, I think that the variety of what took place in the 20th century, musically speaking, and in particular both on the experimental side and also on the so-called dodecaphonic 12-tone side, those things, if nothing else, and I'm not value judgmenting any of them, what they did, at least for me, they allowed me to look at 18th and 19th century music in a completely different way. So they put standard repertoire, the great masters, in an additional perspective, which turned out to be really pivotal for me, because when I left school and began sort of devising my own way of doing things, it meant that I could allow standard repertoire in to my thinking, but from a different standpoint. So, to make a long story short, imagine that, the linearity, I don't want to call it a line without dissonance or a line with too much dissonance, but let's say what we historically associate with, say, a lot of 12-tone music. That stuff was, I would say, influential in the following way, that it found its way into what I do melodically. So you'll see that the thematic writing in pretty much all of my work has a kind of sort of subtle angularity to it. That comes from the middle part of the 20th century, but I mean, you wouldn't expect that. You wouldn't suspect that that might be the case. And the reason is because, after school, after finishing, in addition to developing let's call it my own particular melodic contour, I also developed a harmonic world, which was a thing that was missing in all of the other experimental work. And also, if I may say, with all due respect for all concerned, it was not present in most of the 12-tone works. The harmonic vertical world is the thing that you remember. It allows memory to happen, allows, psychically to get into a piece and stay into it as a listener. That was not there. So I realized that in addition to the melodic contours, I also had to devise simultaneously a harmonic world, which I did. And I continue to do. It's a work in progress, but I'm conscious.
Have you written 12-tone pieces when you were studying? You had to study that and write those pieces
as a student.
As a course.
It's not so much that I had to. It's just that at that particular time, it seemed like, there was some sort of a future to it. True. Because it did have a sort of a, not to be overly technical, but there was a sort of an implied counterpoint of a kind in it. But it had to be manipulated, sort of like, almost like making a sourdough bread. You know what goes, you know what you have to put in when, and you keep needing it. I definitely needed it. And you have to arrive at a point where you get a balance between the two, and then that becomes, I wouldn't say necessarily a new language, but for me it certainly is a dialect of classical music.
I always find it fascinating how Schoenberg never intended this to go the direction it did. He was just taking tonal music to the next logical conclusion of freeing tonality. He still saw himself in that kind of Germanic mold of making this music, and it just went in that direction. He became this guru that hailed him, that next generations through his students.
And we mentioned, Stravinsky in his early ballets, those magnificent works, early part of the 20th century, and then of course in the 1960s, early 70s. Stravinsky then also became a devotee of over here at Princeton University.
He incorporated those serial elements into his composition. Right. It's amazing. I mean, I think that the cross-pollination, the audiences never really connected with the serial composers. But it's very interesting that I think that classical music has gone in such an interesting way in our own lifetimes. So when I hit the university scene, I was in the 1990s, and still it was dominated by composers who studied in this serial composition.
Sure.
And I think we're seeing that's evolving probably today. We're seeing some of that still, but we're evolving. And I think the minimalism has taken a huge role, I think, as kind of a reaction to the serial compositions. We went so far into the serial land, now it's coming back to tonality, but altered in a new reality. What do you think about the minimalist composers? What's your initial thoughts?
It really depends on the piece. I think some of them are very, very effective. I'm interested a lot of times in the orchestration of them and how variety and continuity is created in color. I can always learn from that. I mean, orchestration is an ongoing, art form and a craft in process, for me as well. And so I approach them generally. It depends on the piece, but generally speaking, from that standpoint, the coloristic part of it, and how that might work for me.
It's fascinating to me when I see minimalism is really everywhere today. I'll just give you an example. I was watching Game of Thrones with my children, and Game of Thrones is surrounded by minimalism. All of the great themes are just the simplest kernels of elements. A single solo cello, which just breaks your heart because it fits so beautiful with the scenery. I think minimalism really becomes very good film scoring music. It's just a technique that a good composer can really turn into something special.
I would totally agree. Getting back to what we're talking about, how I developed in this, like writing a symphony or something else. That part of it for me came about as I developed. Once I was more comfortable with, say, the dialect that I'm currently writing in, I became then more confident about writing in large scale forms, and that rather than being minimalistic, though there are certain elements if you were desperate to find, some repetitive ostinati occasionally from time to time, you might be able to do that. But that's not what the piece is about. I realized that I really wanted to tell a story, and that all of my work, whether it's chamber music or orchestral, opera, obviously, ballet, etc., I wanted my work to convey a kind of message, a narrative, almost like a novello or a large-scale written work in the form of words, because I wanted to be able to draw literally for the audience an experience of characters sort of interacting, we'll just say 2, 3, 4, 5 different melodic themes that have a relationship with one another over time, and then that become hopefully fully mature by the end. So you have beginning, a middle, and an end, and that you've created a full story in the musical sense. This is what I've been aiming for for a long time. Once I became relatively fluent in the process of being able to write this, I think the way I write melody, accompanied by the way I write the let's call it harmony or the support aspects. Once those things became clear to me, and I would say it's maybe 25 years ago, something like that, then the ability to tell a story, to make a statement that with a beginning, a middle, and end, that became available. So that's what I continue to do, whatever the format is. I mean, even
how many symphonies have you written? How many concerti have you written? Give us an idea of your very vast.
Okay, so the symphony. I'm glad you asked that question, because I have a lot of phobias about symphonies, because
numbers.
Exactly
the number.
Every symphony I write has an even number. I do not allow myself.
That's great.
Well, I do not allow myself a 1, 3, 5, a 7, or a 9, and I think it's a healthy thing to do. There's enough weight on our shoulders already. I imagine myself in the confines of my studio when I'm there working. Over my shoulder are these, the ghosts of these great masters. I don't even want to mention their names in public. I haven't earned that right to do that. But I will say this: they're laughing. They're getting a kick on it. Oh, Winkler, there's no choice for you, please. You have no possibility. Give it up now. So all these guys, I could do better than that. So it's ongoing. So that's something, and even if they're not actually there pushing your shoulder or making the pen go in a different direction, even if they're in the back of your mind. And so you got to be really careful about even numbered symphonies. So I've written several 2s and several 4s. I admit. And the
2A and 2B.
And the one piece that I gave an odd number to, the fifth, which is the one for organ and symphony orchestra, which has run into a set of walls. And it's not your fault. It's just, we've been trying to find a way to perform it. And but anyway, that's the one that hasn't been played because it probably has. Maybe if I change it to 6 or 8, it'll have a better shot at it.
Better shot.
But I did want to mention something about artistic development. And for a composer, everyone's different. They have their own way of doing things. They have pivotal moments. They have moments that are more important than others. I would have to say, and I think this is a pretty cool story, that in 2013, I was invited by the Martha Argerich project in Lugano, Switzerland. At that time, that's where it was located. And they commissioned me for a piano quintet. Same instrumentation as the Tramm. And it was performed there by a group of virtuoso musicians. And I spent 2 weeks there, not only attending the rehearsals, I spent 2 weeks getting to know more about this constellation of performers that work with Martha Argerich. And the result was that I wrote, 10, 15 works just for that particular constellation of performers over the following 5 years. I just kept writing for them.
Wonderful.
Because they were great musicians, and also they exemplified. They taught me the one thing they all have in common. And the one thing they all have in common is that they're all searching for perfection. And when you're around performers who, I think in some cases are actually getting close to it, but when they all have that, on the tips of their fingers and the back of their minds, perfection is what they want. I'm thinking,
Martha's such a legend. I mean, I'm a huge fan. So, what was it like to write for her? Write for her fingers?
Actually, she was not the pianist in that particular, but she was there, and there was a certain amount of interaction. Remember that thing I said about odd number symphonies? Let me put it this way: the best way to speak about her is to discuss the effect she has had on all these other musicians and people around her. I don't like to characterize the actual collaboration part of it, but I would say that the lesson is a lifelong lesson, and that at all levels, even the uppermost level, at that level, she and everyone else around her, they're all searching for perfection, and some of them are achieving it, and so that was a big influence on me starting back then. So since that point, a number of major works, of course the symphonies, as we discussed, are all in even number, but I've written 2 ballets, but they're not numbered, so I can talk about those. The Little Prince ballet, which is currently being negotiated in Eastern Europe and also probably the United States, and then of course the Alice in Wonderland ballet. Those things each have their own sort of culture. Stage works, have a particular personality, and you have to, the way we wound up putting together the Alice in Wonderland was totally different. From
what I love about those collaborations is Gabriel always has. We've done like 4 pieces together, and each one is a different universe. Like your piece was a certain universe, and he has a different. And I love that. And it's just fascinating to change universes, and to make that piece come alive was such an interactive project.
Well, I mean, it's a good case in point as to what a composer has to do. In other words, in that case,
you had this is too long. I want 20 seconds less here. I want this type of dance music here, and this. And it's who was it Tchaikovsky who called the Nutcracker like sausages, like making sausages. That you're writing very specifically custom tailored.
Yeah. It was the Diaghilev via cell phone. But the other thing was, though, that, for me, 2 hours of music in 6 weeks was pushing it a little bit. I don't normally produce that much that fast. And but I had no choice. Again, I remember we were talking about desperation, it being, the mother of invention. Well, that certainly was the case with that project. And but it was incredibly satisfying to see the project grow, because sometimes I would write 2 or 3 scenes in a day. There were many scenes in that show, as you remember. I think there were at least 18, 19, 20 scenes per act.
Huge,
and it was a monolithic
big
thing.
project.
Yeah. So anyway, I would write the music. I would get what Gabriel wanted the day before. Then either that night or early the next morning, I would finish off 2 or 3 scenes. Then in the afternoon, I would see the choreography. And this was all being done
I'd print the
digitally.
music the day of the rehearsal, hand it out to the players. They got it maybe the night before so they can look at it and come into the first rehearsal not cold. You know, and there were some really different. I mean, you write really beautiful and flowing melodies and challenging parts, and you challenge all the players. You really know.
Darn right.
You certainly know your craft, and it's wonderful to listen to your gorgeous melodies, idiomatic on the instruments, and really take your pride in your orchestration. And it's such a joy as a conductor to watch that come alive, to be the conduit between the composer and the orchestra players, and then to feed that energy. And then it's nothing like live collaboration. That's why I love opera. That's why I love ballet, and I love. We've done so many collaborations together. We've done quite a bit, and,
yes.
and we'll talk about that in a little bit. The other end of your creative output is as a concert producer, which is we'll talk about that next. Okay. But tell me about how COVID has changed your compositional output. How has the things like the Corona, the operatic scenes, how has that shifted the way you write?
Well, as I mentioned earlier at the beginning, for 3 months I was ensconced and I only went outside 12 times. So in a very thinking of it in the most sort of what I call me first, most selfish way, in a way that plays into what a composer normally does. Another piece of advice for composers: if you're an introvert, that's good. If you're an extrovert, I'm not quite sure about that. You'll have to work that out. But if you're an introvert and you are happy or comfortable working hours upon hours upon hours in the confines of your studio without too much not too much input from the outside world, then something like COVID in that isolated instance can work for you. I mean, that was sort of a continuity of my work. So I've actually had, selfishly speaking, a fairly productive, 3-4 months. I mean, I have some concerts being planned now in the early part of 2021 that involve amazingly concerts only of my music, which has never happened to me before. So it's 5 or 6 works of David Winkler in one concert. And it's also
very difficult for a living composer to have that.
In Barcelona and in China and in other places. It's I guess an unexpected and sort of an exciting thing to happen. But in addition to that, the COVID thing. I mean, there's a sheer massive tragedy, which is difficult for an individual person to really absorb and articulate. So that's what brought about, Corona, my love, and the harsh sickness of the sarcasm.
What was the genesis of that project? How did you decide to do that? What started that?
Well, I knew that I wanted to do something that was somehow expressive of it, but I couldn't. I was trying to find a way. How would I do that since no one's around? And who would I work with? And then the thought process sped up after I went to that concert you gave with Natasha and a number of other people who were singing there. And the thought occurred to me, okay, this is something we might be able to do. So I wound up creating the symphonic part of it, the confines of my studio, and I sent it to her at a particular pitch level, wherever she was. I forget whether it was, it might have been Florida or another country, I'm not sure. And so she was able to learn it, that part of it, and record it fairly quickly. So we were able to go back and forth. And of course, there was another person who did the engineering. So it was really 3 people, 3 countries. But I realized,
Isn't it amazing that the collaboration, how vast the collaboration is over a huge amount of space? That's the one thing I'm finding is amazing in this time period is in the time of Zoom meetings, and I've been teaching on Zoom. That becomes an educational tool. These kind of we use Blackboard Collaborate, but it's the same thing. It's this remote platforms. How much we can do with our colleagues. I mean, interesting on a project like this is that if we try to put Western classical music into this virtual environment, it's like putting a square peg into a round hole. But you're creating a new platform for your innovation
for this medium.
Yeah. How does that feel? Describe that. How you came up with this.
I mean, I think that if it's kept within this media, it can be pretty effective. I do have an idea for it becoming a live performed show with growth of scenes and probably 2 acts, maybe 3, but I think it should be able to live in this sort of digital world, which is the world we are currently in. The COVID aspect of it has to do with really, I mean, for me, I was thinking about really, the sheer darkness and the inability for human beings to evolve to a point where they can, agree on what the next step is, despite the fact that it's killing everybody. And, earlier today, where we're staying in New Jersey, I saw two bumblebees, and they were doing their thing. And I said, that's great. And I'm sure the worker bees and the queen bees probably know what they have to do. And I looked around a little bit more, and I saw, these birds chirping away. Yes, that's exactly right. And then I thought to myself, is it true that human beings are really the only life form on the face of the earth that don't know why we're here? What's our purpose? What's our purpose? What are we doing here? I mean, other than destroying as much as we possibly can, as quickly as we can, there must be something positive that we're here for. So, in thinking through, COVID and how it's affecting really the entire world, and not in a good way in any shape or form, I'm thinking, well, maybe, one of the things that human beings are good at is creating something cultural, which means something that can have a value in that moment, and then over time, it can be have additional value. It's the creative things that we've done over the centuries that continue to have value for us, not just in our cultural history, but also just in our aesthetic experience. We need that. Okay, I'm going to give away another trade secret here. So I wrote a second violin concerto a few years ago, and I called it the Seventh Sense. Of course, no one knows what that is, but if you think about it, the seventh sense is aesthetic. It's our ability to reorganize, to understand our cultural stimuli and its symbolism. That's what we can do. We're able to do that in a meaningful way, unlike any other critter I know of. I mean, I just don't know of any other creatures that have the ability to absorb and then to interpret, and then to go the next step, and then to experience something which is multi-leveled. Everybody knows the music of great composers, the great masters, is connected to at least 5-6 parts of our brain thinking. But the aesthetic part, I think, is specific to very, very special to people, and that's sort of the kind of thing that I'm trying to address and to make a contribution in that direction in anything I'm writing now. But that's
was there a specific reason for that? Was there a specific? Was that something you decided to do because you felt you had to do it, or was there a? I'm always fascinated with where pieces come from.
The exact genesis of that little snippet was really there was it came out of a little bit of exasperation to a degree, because even to say Corona my love, what is that? That's really a contradiction right there. And so that's what it was. I wanted to create doubt. I wanted to create question marks. I wanted to create a sort of like being lost in space, not being quite sure what the next step is going to be. So my love, is that someone you're with, or or is somehow you've learned to embrace Corona because you cannot flee from it. So
we're all living in such ambivalence. We're all like, no one really knows what this is fully yet. I guess I always read the past. I always look to the past for inspiration. On this show, I had a couple people on here to talk about. I had a Holocaust survivor friend of mine, Luna Kaufman, and I had a musicologist. We talked about how music recovered from the plagues of the 1300s, right. And then we talked about how the Holocaust, how music was central to the people who were living through it, and right. how coming out of those, absolute atrocities and absolute the worst of humankind times, how we dealt with that, how we processed with that.
And so interesting that it would be music, be one of the choices, because you can't find it. It doesn't have a physical manifestation. It's not like a painting or a sculpture or even a novel. Music, you can't find it, but you can't destroy it either. And so it turns out to be like a permanent, a way of being able to make a pivotal, statement through eternity.
Ephemeral, but lasting at the same time. That's the greatness of classical music. And you talked about this culture being our seventh sense and just always there. It's amazing how that culture defines us and keeps us together. And this pursuit of technical fluency, as you talked about, is really that represents the best of humanity. I think that's why we're artists.
Certainly, I mean, we're driven by, like I was saying, the performers like yourself and many others I've had the pleasure of working to. We're driven by a drive to achieve perfection so that we can make a really meaningful statement that is going to be of value to our fellow human beings. That's the point. And we want that point to be delivered, with sincerity and with power, and so that it has hopefully some permanence to it if it's well enough constructed and seriously enough constructed, and it has a chance to be able to be, performed on the works of the great masters.
So now tell me the other side of your work. I know that you do a lot of other things in addition to your composition. How many hours a day do you spend composing? How does your before we get into the other end, how much time does your composition occupy, and how do you divvy that up?
Interesting you mentioned that, because during COVID, I've been working longer hours because
makes sense.
The other thing you're referring to that I do is that I produce concerts, not only chamber concerts, because I inherited a chamber music group about 20 years ago, but as you know, the Long Island Concert Orchestra, which I run, and which has given really, I think, a very, very interesting variety of concerts, both in the city, Merkin Hall, churches, etc., and then throughout Long Island, and many, many wonderful venues. Morgan Park.
There were so many.
We had a lot of fun.
It was 103 degrees when we did that concert. I'll never forget.
I thought it was 96.
I mean, it was so.
Thank you for enlightening me.
Two people remember. I put a picture of that concert out, and two of the musicians it was so hot. I just remember conducting. I forget what I was conducting, but it was something American, and I was looking at the sun go down over Long Island Harbor, and I'm just I was kind of floating while it was just like this beautiful image. I'll never forget that. And
now I remember the 96 referred to the humidity. You're right. The temperature was 103. The humidity was only a piltering 96.
But it was beautiful.
What a day that was.
what a view, though. It's always beautiful to make music in different settings. People don't realize I love doing parks concerts. I don't like. I like doing pops music. I love doing music of the masters, of course. And I love doing art music. But pops music makes people happy in a way that that people don't realize. There's such a joy in that, and people who may be intimidated to go to a classical concert, that could be the gateway drug that brings them in the door. Yeah. And once I get them in, they're going to come back. Yeah.
But speaking of the other concerts, that I produced, not too long ago, in the spring, I think it was, we produced a chamber music concert in conjunction with the Coe Hall of Planting Fields. The Planting Fields Arboretum is this wonderful state park located in Oyster Bay. And normally we would play there live in one of the, the wonderful facilities that they have on the grounds there. But that was not available in this environment. So we put together a sort of an ersatz, one of these concerts where the artists are off-site, but they're performing live. And through Zoom and YouTube Live, we managed to get a rather significant audience. Wow. And the thing was, I was very curious as to what commentary there would be at the end of the concert, because there's no applause, which is, I mean, it's for a performer, I mean, you live for that. You live. Composers too, you live for being able to bow and to be able to share that experience and really hear carefully what exactly they're thinking, how much did they like, and maybe they really, really liked it. You can feel that. All performers can feel that, and you need that as an affirmation, as a reaffirmation of the performance you just gave. So we didn't have that, but we did have this chat series. Wonderful, fantastic, magnificent. Do it again. How soon can I hear that? It's all the way up and down. And I guess
thumbs up.
I guess you have to say, yeah, thank you so much. So there was that, and then this upcoming project, which I think is pretty darn fascinating, that we've been engaged by the Attila Center, who we've had a performance relationship with over the many, many years. And
Attila Center is Long Island. That's right. What city in Long Island is that?
Greenvale, Long Island. It's on the campus of C.W. Post College.
Beautiful theater. I did about 2,000, 3,000 seats. Right. Gorgeous.
But of course, they too, like every theater I can possibly think of, they've had these, fundamental basic issues of how to program, how to continue, how to re-engage, how not to lose, decades and decades of, dedicated sharing.
How do we continue the mission, but safely, so that we honor the people who are going to be in the audience and the performers on the stage? We're all in this together. So So what's that look like with the Tillis Center? It's,
Well, in addition to the chamber music group that I direct, there's also the orchestra, Long Island Concert Orchestra, which it's only 3 years old, but it's done a lot of different things. And so we've been engaged by the Tillis Center to give, I think, probably one of the first actual live symphonic concerts with actual musicians. You're conducting, by the way. And the audience is going to be present by way of vehicles, cars. They're driving as if they're going to a drive-in movie. And the audio will be piped in through, I believe, a radio channel, a radio station.
It's wonderful.
Yeah, and so that's going to be happening in August. We're part of a series of outdoor concerts, and so it's August 28th, and I'm really excited in a number of ways.
Very brave for the Tillis Center. I mean, this is so exciting to me. I've been working all summer on virtual projects and doing virtual things, which takes the humanity out of a lot of what I do. I mean, I enjoy the virtual projects immensely. I take about 60 singers a week, submit virtual things to me here, and then we process them, put them together, put out a virtual choir, and it's really a beautiful thing in a lot of ways. But what I miss the most is sitting with my colleagues and friends. I'm used to doing 20, 30 of these concerts a year, different places with different orchestras, and I literally collaborate with thousands of musicians every year, and I just feel so alone. And I just brought this up with a couple of my colleagues, my orchestra members who play with me often, and they just can't wait to do anything. I mean, we're all the same. We perfected our craft over our entire lives, and now we're sitting home. Yeah.
Well, at least this particular event, I think, will be possibly groundbreaking and certainly inspiring. If nothing
Maybe
else,
the first one in the region.
I think so. I don't know of any live outdoor performance with actual musicians, but of course, in this case, the audience will be sequestered in their vehicles. But I've been toying around with the ways that they could express themselves either after pieces or at the end of the concert. I'm thinking about, should they honk their horn? I got to really think carefully about that one. I'm not sure about that. Do they get out of their cars and applaud? Do we give them penny whistles? I'm not quite sure how we're supposed to elicit, because I know that once this concert takes place, I mean, as you know, there's some really great works on this program, and people are just going to be, I don't want to say beside themselves, but they're going to be highly, highly appreciative. They're going to want to do what audience, applause is sort of like, embracing the artist, right? You put your hands together almost as if you're putting your arms around the performer, and if you particularly love the performance which is taking place, you really want to express yourself. It's the reciprocation that you so much need as part of the cultural experience. So I haven't figured that part out yet, but I think the event should be both inspiring, because it will be live orchestra, though admittedly out of doors, and also maybe we'll learn something from it about how to do other similar activities. I can sort of see, practically speaking, how a pattern might emerge for giving other events. So I'm very excited that we'll be able to do this next one coming up, because it's going to be pretty unique and possibly a groundbreaker.
Well, David, you're really an innovator and a really creative presence. That's one thing. I've known you for like a good 3 years now, almost, and you have such a great creative energy. The energy you put into your composition, you take equally as seriously when you produce concerts and when you form collaborations. And I think that's a big part of your success, is that you're just a collaborative force and looking to synthesize. Just like as a composer, you do the same when you're in your creative endeavors like this. And it takes that energy to make anything happen. It's the partnership between the theater, the conductor, the orchestra, the organization. It's a lot of moving parts.
I really appreciate you saying that. Thank you so much. And by the way, I think the same applies to you, because I mean, not just through this program, but the amount of conducting, the amount of bringing people together, these choruses in the hundreds and hundreds of people, all these orchestras. This is something which is just basically the part and parcel of what you're all about. So we share that part, even though what I do comes at a different stage in supplying the new work. Nonetheless, our aims are very, very similar. Ultimately, to provide meaningful experience for our communities.
That's the most important thing we do, is to inspire people, because I always say a conductor without an ensemble is a crazy person waving his arms around in the mirror.
Stay away from those odd-numbered symphonies.
I always wonder what the greats, what would Brahms think? Like, right, in the middle of writing the Fourth Symphony, I study these pieces at 3 in the morning, like you do. It's not that dissimilar between a conductor and a composer, except that I have the rehearsal process to engage people. But my study time is me alone, 3 in the morning in my studio. My kids have gone to sleep. I can work for 3 solid hours before anyone's up. And that time is so exciting to me. That's my favorite time in the world, is the study time, is to engage the great composers, to engage the new composers, to think, get in their minds. What were they thinking? Why did they write that? Why is that harmony, that chord there? That's my favorite time. And I wonder, like, what did the composer think when they were writing this? What elevated mental state were they possibly when they put that on the page?
Okay, I'll respond to that once again. I'm not going to allow myself to talk about Johannes Brahms in public. I just can't do it. But I will say this. I did write, as we know, it would be even numbered. I wrote a Fourth Symphony that was performed in Lerici, which is a Mediterranean seaside town in Italy last August. A lot of things happened last August. I had 4 premieres last August.
I remember that. You were in the middle end of the ballet. I remember you were racing around the world.
But anyway, the premiere in Lerici went very, very well. And the thing is that what was I thinking about then? What I wanted to do with that particular work was to create. Of course, this is all pre-COVID, but my idea was, first of all, to create a sort of a melodic thematic landscape that people hadn't heard before, and to finish off the storytelling in a way that was unique to the best of my ability. And to create a work that would have that people would still be, sort of their bodies would be vibrating once they left the hall. So there was a great deal of physicality, both in the first movement and the third movement. And I tend to write 3-movement symphonies because I like to put the scherzo inside a slow movement.
Oh.
Most slow movements of symphonies, and I'm not going to say whether they're odd number or even numbered by previous masters, tend to be somewhat perfunctory. And it's sort of left over from the Baroque period.
Yeah.
As you know, there were so many concertos of 3 movements. The second movement tended to be just sort of probably an opportunity for improvisation, but relatively simplistic by comparison to, say, the outer movements. So I really do like the Italian overture as a format. But I wanted to expand it a little bit. So in that particular Fourth Symphony for Lerici, I created a very, very atmospheric slow movement in the middle, something I hadn't done quite that way before, and then I built the scherzo inside it to sort of inform the slow movement about an internal kind of an energy. People would not be expecting that, and then to finish off the form with an enormous amount of forward-moving energy and drive. I hadn't written a symphony for, not counting the fifth that we don't talk about, but I hadn't written a symphony for several years, and this gave me an opportunity to work in a broader landscape. It's about 35 minutes, and it came across. It was really beautifully received, and but the important thing was that it created and left a kind of a sort of a resonance of great energy, which is one of the things, positive energy, which is actually one of the things I just might briefly mention is that the narrative I've been talking about, creating a beginning, a middle, and an end in pieces. Generally speaking, the endings of my work feel resolved, and that's sort of like the beginning of a whole different kind of a discussion. And I don't think we really have time for that, but there is a sort of a flow of music history. If you go all the way back to the modal, and then the Baroque period, and then the tonality, and then of course the Romantic period, and then chromatic, and then 12-tone. What happens after that? Well, what I do is I write in a dialect that I would call pan-modal, which really incorporates a lot of what has transpired before, but in terms of technical. But the melodic part of it, I think, is pretty much original with me. And
I think that pan-modal is a really interesting concept because, I mean, being a living composer today, we had a question from someone from Jack from New Jersey just mentioned about styles and what is a composer like you who lives? You've studied obviously all the styles. You've lived the master composers your entire life, and you I'm sure we all draw inspiration from people, and how you would turn that into a unique style like you have, like your melodic and harmonic sense, and how you draw, what inspiration you draw from the current artists around you, and it must be a very interesting time. Because there's only 12 notes to draw from, and but there's all this. But you seem to bring a lot of philosophy into your work. Certainly,
the thing is, it all depends who you are and how you work and how long you've been stylistically fluent. But composer does not necessarily draw inspiration from other music taking place around him. Possibly, but not necessarily. In my case, it's sort of a broader resource. And so I think in terms of lineages, not so much of, contemporary music here or music of the 1940s or, 2005, what was going on there. It's more like, it's the confluence of the, there's I was sort of briefly alluding to, there's this, Baroque world of various composers, and then there's the classical world, and then there's the Romantic, generally speaking. And those two things sometimes operate with one another, and sort of create a crazy quilt. Other times they simply stand by themselves. So I tend to think more in terms of, those traditions and where they go, how they, inform me in terms of like total content. So I never in a position to say, well, I really like that composer's work. I think that I'll take off from there.
Right.
That.
Did you feel like that when you first started? Did you ever did you quote people? Did you ever, when you first started composing, did you like draw from your mentors?
There was one. I think I was 15 or 16, and I was writing. It was amazing. I was 17. I was writing a film score. I just happened to be walking through a college that I ultimately would go to for a short period of time, and a nuclear physicist was an amateur filmmaker, and he put up on the bulletin board, needed one composer very soon, and then he left a phone number on there. So I hadn't written it for film, but anyway, I said, let's try that. So anyway, I dialed. Remember that? I dialed a phone number, and I didn't hear from Victor for 2 months, and then suddenly one day I got this phone call back from Victor Irma, and it was this really deep, dark Eastern European accent, someone who hasn't had to really speak too much English recently, and he said, I think you're probably good for this film. Why don't we discuss? So yes, we'll have coffee. I'll call you. So anyway, we ultimately did get together, and there was this crazy underground film that he had done that wound up winning some awards.
Interesting.
Actually, I left this out of my bio, and actually a scene that I had scored was voted the #1 scored scene at the Festival of Algiers.
Interesting.
I forget exactly what year it was, but anyway, I had the model for writing that when I was not so much that young but that inexperienced was the entr'acte of Berg's Wozzeck.
Oh.
So that was an instance where I really tried to copy the of another composer's work.
I think as you live longer, as you do it more, as your fluency grows, as we said, then you don't draw on those models so much because it's so organic. I mean, I as a composer, as a conductor, whenever I analyze a new piece of music, I'm always fascinated to see influences, and a lot of them are just organic and it's just inevitable. But certain orchestral touches or certain choices in orchestration just fascinate me. How people make these choices, and it's idiomatic, and it's fun to kind of as a conductor, when you get to a point of your studies and your work where you can look at a Beethoven piece, which style of what period of Beethoven that was and why, and how it evolved over, like Puccini. I know Puccini really well, and how his influences of Debussy mixed with his own Italian lyricism as it comes together. It wasn't there originally. It took years of practice to make that what became obviously Puccini. It took years of that to come forward as being the finished product that we know today.
It's so true. Sometimes you can be influenced by something without really knowing it. I mean, you may hear it or you may see it, but you don't necessarily know it's going to become part of you. And there's a little bit of a piece of advice I have for another one of these, let's call them, shop talk, is that you wind up copying what you don't know in as a composer. So if you haven't studied Schubert, you haven't studied certain of Beethoven, you haven't studied certain of Haydn, that music is going to wind up in your music.
Oh,
That's how rigorous I believe that the history of music is, because all those great composers, they were studying the music of their the composers that came before them. Yes. So if you don't do that, it's going to show up in your work. It will mean that you have not internalized it yet. So whether the symphony is an odd number or an even number, you still have to study it and to make it enough your own so that you don't copy it, so that it becomes part of your resource. It becomes part of your overall, creative self, and it doesn't have to be labeled, oh, well, it came from this symphony or that. You're talking about the essence of it. Remember earlier we were...
That's a universal human theme. That's going to be in anyone's... It's like a novel. A novel's got a protagonist.
Exactly.
There's certain stylistic characteristics of a novel that's going to be in any novel. And
it's the multi-level part of it, and it's the symbolism there that only we are able to absorb and then to retwist, recast, in our own way. The symbolism without quoting. So that's what makes for the possibility of new works, going forward, because it does ultimately become you.
Wow. Such a wonderful conversation today. And this is the first time I've actually had this
conversation
conversation live.
I knew it was going to be great because we had, how many conversations do we have a year? Hundreds?
Oh, yeah.
We haven't had a conversation in 3 months.
We'll sit down over a
face.
meal and just go through ideas. And I love that too. And, that's the reason I started this, is because it was the conversations that I missed so much with my colleagues. And I felt like I had, for a month, I did nothing. I mean, I did a little bit of teaching. I was teaching in the middle of teaching, converting my entire teaching into a virtual platform, which is, just very difficult on a dime. But then I went through a phase where I did a lot of yard work, and I did my music, but I was in shock.
Yeah.
And I came out of shock, and I'm like, you know what? I need to connect with people. I love these people. This is why I do this, is the connection with people, and this has enabled me to get that fire back and to get inspired by
people. I can see that.
I
can feel that. This is good for you as well as the rest of us and your guests. So.
And I learned so much from my colleagues, and you know what? The colleagues we work with, all of us, they're just active people. They're energetic people, artistic people, and we have synchronicity, and the synchronicity feeds off itself. So I'm excited for the next chapter. I mean, there will be times again where we will be making music, and not before too long. That's going to be here before we know it.
Yeah.
And I look forward to seeing your next compositions and to see where these go, and to see how you're inspired by both current events and also writing in pre-established genres and expanding the forms of these genres. It's an exciting time to be a composer.
It is. Well, I look at it that way. I mean, basically, creatively speaking, I'm very, very positive. As far as the world condition, I have great pessimism. But still, our role as creative artists is to to create what is best and what we have to offer one another.
And we're like amber, like in society. We absorb everything that goes on around us, and we solidify it. And the history, the culture, the COVID now, and that's all going to be in our amber of our current time as artists, as we congeal that and it gets formed. Well, David, thank you so much. It's great to have you
Jason,
live. And
my pleasure.
This is the first time I've shaken hands with anyone on air for this. It's very different doing the show with someone who's in Vienna or someone who's in Texas, and the latency issues involved. But it's great to have you in the studio today, and I want to thank you.
Totally a pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me.
And thank you for joining us for Music Matters 2020. We are a unique and new growing podcast community, and we exist for you, the viewer, to engage with great artists and great minds and people who are doing wonderful things today. There's innovation being made every day in the music field, and remember, it's up to you and to us to keep music alive and vital. Please subscribe to our channel. Hit the bell if you want the most up-to-date information on upcoming guests and topics. Like us on Facebook, and remember, keep music alive. Good night.